I have decided to make a video for you um, to get you prepared for the challenges of specifically this class, English 102. But really, the guidelines I'm giving you could help any student do well on really any kind of essay exam, um, because ultimately, the bottom line rule is to get organized and to think clearly before you start to write. And I have some very specific pointers about how to do well. I understand that for some people, taking exams is a really terrifying thing. And I do understand that. The hardest exam I ever had to take, I had a year to prepare for, but it was a 3 hour oral exam in front of people who'd written books on the topic that I was supposed to extemporaneously improvising lectures and to answer all of their questions for 3 hours on my feet in front of this room of experts. The night before, I kind of lost my mind just crying with anxiety. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done as a thinker, but I did what I'm telling you to do to get ready for this, which is don't agonize. Yes, I cried. Yes, I called my best friend. But then I got organized. When I realized I had a small hole in my organization for this big exam, I got organized. And that is what I am telling you to do. Here are things that you should think about in advance of really any exam, not just an essay exam, but specifically for an essay exam. You should review the reading, and given that reading, I want you to think about this, um, about where you try to essentially imagine the exam based on what you've read in advance. What might be the themes that this exam would cover? You cannot know with absolute certainty, but surely you've noticed what the professor talks about in the class. What does the professor seem to think is important? And if you were writing the exam, which themes and ideas would seem important to you if you wanted to evaluate other people's understanding of it? I would give that some consideration. Obviously, it's the professor who writes the exam and not you. But if you can think a little bit like you were a professor yourself, I think you will see things more clearly. Um, Again, think about what the professor's already said. What have you discussed in class before the exam? And what did the professor specifically say about the text that you were reading together? Anticipating in advance what might be on the exam will help you organize your ideas. Once your ideas are organized, there are some other things to get organized. News is that all of the exams in my classes of English 102 are open book exams. Maybe you want to say hallelujah to that. Maybe that sounds fantastic. Well, also, news. All of my exams in English 102 for my students are open book. Why could that be bad? Well, you're going to have to be very organized because I am going to expect you to operate like someone who already knows and completely understands the texts that you are reading. You need to be ready during this exam to cite specific passages from the text to support your major claims in your essay. And you need to be able to cite all passages of the text in MLA correctly. That is not optional, and it is not a small detail. I cannot overemphasize how seriously the English Department of Southeastern takes that. If you don't do it correctly on an open book exam, we are prepared to fail your work in the course. Don't be that student. Be the student who succeeds. The good news is that you can actually get prepared for this with an open book exam. There's no way you'll forget how to do this if you know where to look in a book and you have the book in your hand. And the third thing that we're going to be sure to do with Southeastern and English 102 is we expect you to be able to spell with a dictionary that you could actually bring to class. My goodness. You should know how to write a coherent essay exam. You will have access to the text that you will be using to answer the exam question, but as a consequence of that, you have to be ready to provide a clear and persuasive essay with correct citation methods, and that because there are no more excuses. It's not like you had to memorize something. You don't. You have to show up prepared. And you need to have read in advance, and you need to learn how to access the information quickly enough to write the exam. Here are things to get ready for every essay exam in English 102. Here is a list of things you want to get ready. The first would be for you to mark up the pages of your text that you're bringing in for the open book exam with Post-it notes to point to possibly relevant passages. Again, you won't know the exact question, but surely you can mark with a Post-it note anything that seems significant in the meaning or the thematic concerns of a particular text. Another thing I'll say is if you have more than one text, and many of the exams that you'll take in this class will in fact have more than one text, what you would do in such a case is you would want to think about how the texts either relate to each other or contrast to one another. And think about that as you put Post-it notes where things might be relevant to a coherent answer about the material that the text covers. For the love of Pete, for the love of God, for the love of all that you hold sacred, put a Post-it note in the little brown handbook where it shows the reader how to format parenthetical in-text citations in MLA. Why? All of your work in this class that is involving an essay exam will actually require you to do that. So you have no excuse for getting it wrong. Zero excuse. The good news is that you get to walk in with the answer marked in advance. Put a Post-it note there. If you are not someone who does well, particularly with spelling, for the love of Pete, for the love of God, for the love of all that you hold sacred, get yourself a hard copy pocket dictionary. And if there is a word that you misspell frequently, put a Post-it note there in the place where you make the mistake with some frequency. There's no excuse for not spelling well. You could borrow a hard copy pocket dictionary from the library. They are also very cheap to own. You could do this. And if you have had any trouble with earlier essay exams, make a Post-it note for yourself with the steps that I am about to give you for writing this essay. You're watching this video. You can pause it. You can go back and watch it again. You can write all this down. Put this Post-it note somewhere in the exam readings that will help you have a game plan for steps to take to succeed. This is like a crib sheet that you also can bring into any exam. It is not against the rules to bring in a game plan for success. Here are the steps that I would have you take in writing your exam essay. The first one sounds self-evident, but you'd be surprised how many students get nervous and don't do well at this. Read the exam question very carefully. Very carefully. Number one thing to do would be underline exactly what the prompt is asking you to do and to talk about. Be sure you understand each part of it. Now, sometimes I will expect, based on classroom experience, for you to be able to understand a word, but you get to bring a pocket dictionary with you just in case you didn't understand a word on the prompt. You could look it up and it would not be against the rules. My goodness. Make sure you know and underline exactly what you are being asked to do. Figure out how many citations you are expected to write. How many paragraphs are you expected to write? You will know how long you have to take the exam. And more importantly than perhaps more importantly than those other details, consider what elements the exam prompt or exam question asks you to cover in your answer. What are the elements of the question that you have to be able to answer? Make sure you understand what those are. The second step is to write an outline every time. I give a few points to a student who does an outline. I take away a few points for a student who doesn't, not very many. But what I will most certainly do is see whether or not the student has an organized answer. And sometimes students write an outline that is just almost like a brainstorm of like a word dump. What words are associated with this topic? And perhaps that's the first step in writing an outline for some people, but it is usually not the last step. If I see an organization plan, not just a word dump in what you have written, and I'm able to decipher it and you ran out of time, I will try to give you a few extra points on the exam based on what you intended to cover. Otherwise, I simply can't do that. But more than that, it helps you stay on track, which is more important than what I read when I read that you have done an outline. Write a thesis statement. What is your thesis? That one sentence, what is it going to be? And you should imagine and write several major points that would support that thesis statement. You don't have to write them all the way out. I would write something like the key issues, maybe 3 of them, maybe 2, maybe 4. And I would think about how I would prove those major points using the texts that I have read. I'd want to be able to find passages, even if I'm just writing page numbers for myself in the outline or just noting them, I would find them. And you should imagine 1 paragraph of counter argument. This is particularly important on the final exam. In other words, if someone were going to disagree with your assertion, what might he or she say? But then you would want to find passages that help you discuss the counter argument and then refute it. Then say, no, this person had a point, but it wasn't as good as the other point that I would make. It's not the most important thing here. And then organize the essay so that your thesis is introduced in an introductory paragraph. A paragraph should never be shorter than 3 sentences. Otherwise, it's just a statement of 1 or 2 sentences. It's not a paragraph. So you need to have an introductory paragraph that allows for your thesis statement to be one of them. And a summary of your main points in the essay, those major points that I talked about, should be summarized in your concluding paragraph. Is a sample outline. I'm going to go through this. I am imagining a rather silly essay, but I made it simple so that you can understand it and think about it and maybe hopefully remember it. Imagine for a minute that instead of reading prep, you'd been asked to consider the merits of pet ownership. And there was a book we read about pets, different kinds of pets, cats and dogs. And my question that I was asked was to tell the reader whether cats were better than dogs or dogs were better than cats. And I chose to say that dogs are better than cats. Then it's time for me to organize myself into, it's going to be for me a 6-paragraph essay. If I were writing a minimum 5-paragraph essay and I was worried about the time, I might just have 2 supporting points before I got to my counter argument. My first supporting point would be after my first paragraph, which will be a thesis paragraph, talking briefly about the subject, at least 3 sentences for each paragraph. My second paragraph will involve my first supporting point. My first supporting point is going to be that dogs are loyal, and I will include a passage from what we have read about loyalty of dogs, and then I won't just have the passage, I will explain after I will introduce a quotation in context, then I will quote and cite the quotation, and then I will explain the relevance of that quotation to my proving that dogs are loyal. The third paragraph would include my second supporting point. Dogs are friendly. I am going to say what passage, I'll have a passage about a friendly dog. I will introduce the passage in a context. I will say, in this one chapter, we encounter an exceptionally friendly dog. I will quote the passage about the friendly dog, and then I will explain its relevance. Because so few people find enough friends in the world, how wonderful that man's best friend is indeed his best friend, might be how I would conclude the third paragraph. My fourth paragraph contains a third supporting point. Dogs are useful in that they can protect an owner from harm. And I would think about where we read about a guard dog in the text, and I would then introduce it in context. We see this character, this person who has a guard dog. I quote the passage about the dog and cite it, and then I explain the relevance of that passage to my proving of my thesis. My fifth paragraph is going to be a counter argument. Some people say cats are better than dogs. It's not that I'm going to say, well, they're just stupid. They smell bad. Why would you hang out with them? They're awful. That's not a refutation of a counter argument. That's just me insulting the people who disagree with me. So I would want to acknowledge that with perhaps a passage about friendly cats or people's perceptions of friendly cats or loyal cats or whatever it is that people think make cats better. I would establish that dogs were yet somehow better. I would need two passages possibly for this paragraph. One that talks about a good quality in the other point of view, and then another passage that somehow helps me say, no, the people who disagree with me, though their intentions are good and maybe they even have some points, I'm still right, not them. As I say, I would defy anyone to fight a guard cat. And then I would explain how really, if one thinks carefully, cats really aren't as good as dogs, despite the counter argument. And then my last paragraph is, it ought to be a summary conclusion. I would want to say the main points that I've made once more in a summary. And an easy way to organize that would be to basically say what I said in the essay somehow in reverse. Notice what I've done. I've essentially, it's almost like I've pulled into a parking space with all of these points. Dogs are loyal, dogs are friendly, dogs can protect an owner from harm. Some people say cats are better than dogs, but here's why they're wrong. And my thesis is simply that dogs are better than cats. That's the very first thing I said. Imagine, though, that I'm going in reverse here. Here is a set of sentences that could, in fact, make up a concluding paragraph in summary, and I've just put them in the reverse order. Despite cat lovers enjoying their cat's companionship, dogs are good at more things than cats are. Dogs can protect an owner from attackers. Dogs are loving. Dogs never abandon their owners. Notice that I'm going backwards in the essay. And then I'm going to restate my thesis in a new way. Despite all of cats' charms, a dog is simply a perfect pet. And what I have done is I have reminded the reader of all my main points, but I've made a fresher paragraph than I would have otherwise had. And so my third step in writing the exam essay is to write the exam according to the plan of the outline. The outline will help me make the plan. I could write my plan in relative shorthand. I gave a much more rich example of it so that you could imagine it with me. But the important thing is to keep yourself on track. If I see an outline of any kind, I give you as much credit for however it's detailed as I can. But I would tell you that the important person to inform of your plan is you. It's not me, because I'm going to be really evaluating the essay you write, not the outline, except that you wrote one. I do want you to show me your plan. More or less what I'm really asking you to do is show me that you have planned. But now that you have your plan, it's time to write the essay according to that outline. And I would pace myself as I write. Be aware of the amount of time you have. Review the exam essay once you have finished to make sure you have not made any spelling errors or other errors. Sometimes we realize we say the opposite when we're writing in a hurry than what we meant, or maybe there's a slight error in logic. We want to add a sentence in the middle of a paragraph. That would be the value of proofreading it and making sure that it's done when you've done what you want. If you have any time at all at the end of the exam, do spend it proofreading. Once you've proofread it and you're confident you have it all down, you could turn it in. But if you have extra time, don't just try to get out of the room quickly. Take the time to read it over and make sure you are ready to turn it. A student who does this, as I say here, is likely to pass with flying colors. If you're prepared, you will do well. You don't have to memorize things for the exams in my class. You do have to be ready to write, and that means that you need to organize. Don't agonize.